Hello and welcome back to the IPControl 16 evaluation series. And in this particular video sequence, I want to cover the Swagger interface and our REST APIs, specifically that we are advertising from the IPControl Executive and also from the Cloud Automation Appliance, which as we go through these next few videos and series, we'll be discussing further with the workflows. So the Swagger interface is available on the executive at https:// your IP address : 8443 / inc -rest /api /docs /index.html. That's a long way of saying that, but for those watching the caption, maybe that'll come across correctly. And then you can see the whole Swagger JSON file if you're interested in downloading that, or through curl or some command. You can actually just reach it right here, which is what we're viewing in this particular screen. So when you do access this interface, you're going to initially see the Swagger. You'll see it broken out into various data elements, and which is a little different than what our documentation does, which our documentation you're going to need in order to actually work with the APIs, because it covers both CLIs and the application interface, programming interface. And more specifically, it's going to give you all of the field names, all of the property names, and all of the different selectors, if you will, that you'll need if you want to do exports, because the exports give you the ability to filter out data during the sequence. Secondly, you will also need to make sure that when you go to your administrators, and either in your administrator roles, typically where you would do this, and then if you had like your access under policies, you need to ensure that these users under the policy tab have WebUI and CLI, or at least CLI, to be able to access the Swagger or the command line interfaces or even the APIs. So all of those are required as a means of accessing the tool. Now, in terms of the way that the Swagger is developed, it's intended to give you the ability to both see and document, or see the documentation for the APIs, and as well as to test all of these APIs so that you can see firsthand what the input is, the output, the headers, and then it gives you this curl syntax, which you can almost duplicate in across any platform. So once we give you the curl, you effectively can take that, you can put it on any different system, Macs, Windows, Linux, and run the curl command off the command line, and it'll work everywhere you go. So one note, as we're walking through this, as you list it, the first API, the only API that will work without a username and password or logged in initially, is actually the login. So just to give it out, they give you a little form field here, and I'm just going to type this, and this does actually echo text back to the password, so again, be careful here. But the point of this is that I want to demonstrate is this is the only API you can call without actually logging in or authorizing first. You will see this exclamation point if you are not authorized. It means before you go through the syntax of setting up any complex JSON or anything like that, copy it first if you see this, because it will clear your text screen if you log in after you type it, just as a note. So now what we've done here is we've run the curl command, and so this curl command, and what you're going to see here is how this would actually look if you were to run this off the command line. So if you were to copy this directly and try to run it from the Sapphire, first of all, it's going to fail. And the reason it's going to fail is because we're using self-signed certificates, which means that you would need to override that with a -K. So when you're looking at that information, I'll just show you here real quick. So again, if I were to take that and copy it just as is, you'll see here I get the SSL certificate error. So when you're dealing with the Swagger, just be sure that you put the -K option in at any time, because you're going to need that. And you may also want to put in a -S, which will be silent if you're trying to pull data back out. So you can do -S, -K, and that will be just pull the data. And then also, just so you know, as you're seeing this, and we're going to come back to this at a later point, We have a JQ, which is a JSON processor, which allows you to see this more as an object with some highlights. And I highly recommend you use it, which is available on the appliance. So with all of that said, the very first thing you would need to do to test or to even use this is to log in with some credential. And we're going to go ahead and do that. I'll use INC admin for this purpose. For the right IPC, if you want to have any kind of importing or access, you need to select that and then authorize. If for any reason you don't authorize and you see that exclamation point there under any one of these APIs, you'll know again that you're not authenticated. This right here with the informational icon represents you are authenticated, and that's going to be valid for an hour. It won't tell you that the hour's up. So 1 hour, 1 minute, if you go to try to run one of these, you may have to log out and then log back in again in order for this to give you a new session. Okay, so with all of that, the way, again, that we break this out is by data types. The export API, which you'll need to use for this, is going to break it out by its verb or its action, which are effectively broken out in groups of imports, exports, deletes, gets, tasks, and updates. And you're going to see the same thing if you expand out the various data elements here, like address pools or DHCP address pools. And you have then the method of the type. And then you have the, if you expand on any one of these, you'll see effectively the model telling you what the different fields are, optional, required, string, arrays, and so forth. You'll then have an example value, which shows you the input values if you have that information. Now, I'm not sure exactly what a pool is here, but let's go out and see if I can find one and see what we can do. And so let's see if I have a pool anywhere in here. I may not. I don't. Okay, so let's see if I can grab another one here. Okay, so here's an example of one here. I'm just going to click on it. And the screen's a little skewed since I'm kind of working on this here. So let's try this. Let's see what happens with that. Oh, okay. Well, great. So here's a response as an example. So now in this response, again, you get your curl, and we would put the -ks in here. But now notice this, that once you start using the login, all of the APIs subsequent to the login are expecting a header, and they're expecting an authorization bearer header, and then they are expecting the token from the login. So now what that requires then is that every command you need to invoke a login first, get a token. That token's valid for a period of time. So if you're doing gets and imports, you can reuse that token, and it's valid for up to an hour, and then you'd have to log in again and get another token. However, if you're using exports, we recommend you log in each time you run an export just to ensure a unique table for the export and a session ID for those. And I'm going to go over examples of how you use those exports, and I'll show things like Postman, how you can do that through these applications and tools as we move forward. But I just want to kind of walk through a few more of these of interest and show you what we have here. So we have the address pools, you have all types of administrators, roles, agents or software installations that we work with Windows and others that you can import, export, and create these agents. Aggregate blocks, appliances, so we can import, export all of the different appliance definitions. So what we had done through the web interface, we could effectively through a bootstrap process go in and create the Sapphire, the subnets, the networks, the IP addresses, and literally do the whole thing from the beginning of this. Now, when we get into blocks and subnets, we're going to provide you a number of different utility APIs, and then you're going to have your imports and exports. All right, so the utilities we have here, you can go out and get a couple of blocks by its IP address, by its name. You can get a block by it containing an IP address, which is an extremely useful utility. So when I'm out exporting or searching for data, I may not know the actual subnet size, and I may not know the CIDR, so I just do a get by IP address or an export using an IP address filter, and it'll determine what subnet that IP is in for me and make it easier to obtain the data. Now, other things you could do here too, like joining blocks, splitting blocks, and some of the other functions. And then this last one here I find very useful, actually both of these here, that you can calculate the real-time statistics at the moment you're calling the API. So when I'm looking for the next available IP address and I have multiple processes running, once one invokes and takes the next one, I can then say calculate it. I can get a list of the used and the available, and then I can make decisions. Do I want to use this subnet if it's at, say, 50% utilization? Do I want to go to another subnet? That type of logic. So these utilities are going to help you determine that based on status and other things. The block types, like the private public that we built in the previous block types, these are going to be your block types here that you would see for your subnets. So if we wanted to import and export and create all of that from API, we can do that too. Your password, the child block, so I mentioned before that you can get the init and export child blocks. And I'm going to go over this real quick here too, but one other thing you'll have here is a child block UDF tags. So one of the things we've added, and specifically for subnets, where you may or may not know what are the available user-defined fields that I would need for my input. And so in this, you can do a pre-call, tell it, here's the subnet, go out and get the UDF fields that are valid for the subnet, and then add the input form, expect those input values. Secondly, the way that we work with exports, and this is going to be somewhat of a complex discussion, so I hope I can cover this well for you. The default behavior of using our exports, and by the way, when I click on this model here to example to try it, it puts the text in this for me that I can then go in and edit. So what I'm going to do here, and first I'll show you how you would use this doc as well. So we're going to go down to the exports, and I want to look for export child block. All right. So the first thing to note is with an export function, and they talk about this through the API, there are effectively 3 API requests required for the full export. There is an initialization where you're passing it any filters, page sizes, any pagination, other filters, and so on. The second is once it returns a context to you that gives you basically the record counts and some other details about your filter, you then pass that detail, the context, into an export command, and it'll give you the number of records you specify in the page size and allow you to continue to pass that information until you've received all of the different records. And as the last API, you would have then an end export, which then breaks it all down. So it's really made up of 3 different API calls. In it, you have the export child block and then the end export. And this will go through and tell you what those actually mean there. So now in the other use of this then, I want to set up a filter, and I'm going to do this one here because I happen to know I have some blocks in here. So I have a container, and actually let's go down and look for the selector. So here's the selector list. This is a container, and these are case sensitive. So in the container, I can do container equals, and I can do the short name. One note is that you have a double quote opening it, and then you have an equals and a single quote for string values where required. The second part of this is the page size 0 tells it how many records to return, and I'm going to tell it none. I'm going to set this to false for include this. And actually, let's do this first and see what happens. All right, this is a valid query. So it just returned all the records, just a bunch of them. So let's do one more thing here. Let's take out this page size. And what we should get without the page size, and the page size basically being the indicator that I want to return X number of records, which I'm going to explain here in a second. So on the initialization, without a page size, it gives you back this context. And what it expects that you're going to do with this context is that you're going to use it and you're going to pass it into an export child block. So we need to go up to the export. It expects that we have this context wrapper. So I need to have this open bracket, new line, and then we're going to have context. Now I don't need this next opening bracket because I'm just simply going to paste what I had and then add a trailing to close it all off. And then what I expect is that this is going to give me a list of blocks that match, based on that count, and I would continue to run this until I got null, representing that there's no more. Then I would go up. I could basically take this whole section here, go to the end export, paste this in that block, and run that, and that ends or cleans up the temporary table. Now, programmatically speaking, that's not too much to do because you can call it sequentially one after another. You get the context, you run it. Are there more records? And when it says null, you finish and end it. But there's a simpler way to do this. And so I'm going to go in, and we have a shorthand version of this, which allows us to say, I want to get all of the records up to the whatever amount. So I'm going to do this again. Re-click this, reset my filter. And I'm going to do contains ATL. And I should get multiples back here. And I'm going to say 10,000, just for the heck of it. And we're going to do false. And I'm going to tell it to do this. Now, there's a couple notes about this. I can tell it arbitrarily any number I want to. That could be 1,000,000 records as far as I'm concerned. The truth of the matter is, when you go up here to the system policies and options, there is a max block export that's going to have the number of records that you can export. I have mine set to 50,000 because I do a tremendous number of full exports, lookups, validation, things like that. So in yours, if you're allowing users to authenticate, this is a global session or global value, and if you allow up to 50,000 records, that could be a bit. So you might want to have control over the values at a record level, allowing for super users, and globally, you can pull all the records out. So this would be 50,000 subnets, 50,000 IPs, 50,000 resource records, 50,000 administrators, whatever it is we have. But somehow in your code, limit the user and the page size, and maybe set some hard code values that you might want to say you can request up to 250 or something like that. Now, my caveat to this is, let's say that we do 100, or let's say we do 5, and there's 100. I'm only going to get 5 addresses. So what you need to understand is, if you're doing it this way, that when we run this shorthand version, it initializes it, exports it, and then ends the export. It breaks it all down. It gives you all of the records you expect here by page size, but that is not all inclusive of the records. So be sure that you have a number that's exceeding the number of records that you expect to return, and that your policies enable it. And so that is by far the simplest method of running, is by doing it this way. And then I want to show here that you can do other values for these blocks, like the names, the size, or the address, the wildcards. But then we also have some things here like the create dates, if you want to get into date and time that these were created. And then we get down into some things like some values here. So show me export subnets that only have 5 assigned or 5 available. So you can start doing queries based on high or low utilization values and others by using these various selectors. So it gives you an example here of how you would use it, and you can AND these values together as well. So I could do and let's say percent available is greater than equal to 50, and percent available greater than equal to 50. And this should work. Let's try that. Yeah, there you go. And so this should give you that availability then based on those counters. Now, what you won't see here, by the way, in this export detail, is it does not show you those utilization counters. It's giving you the detail behind the scenes. So now if you wanted to go out, and we could go out and say, grab this one here, the subnet block. And if I wanted to see the utilization counter values, I would look at this block. And I would look at this block by IP address. I would put this in. I can't do that. So I would then do 24, and then this is going to be ATL-VO. And I have overlapping blocks, so I need to specify this. And I can do deployed as a subnet type. And let's try it. All right. Now, this particular API, as I mentioned, goes and gets the information immediately. So this will pull back the stats, Well, that's actually the get blocked by IP address. Let's pull back the stats here. Let's do the same thing. And 24. Okay. And so now this should give us the statistics about that subnet that are used for this formulation of what is available based on those values. And so these are calculated in real time. It's not pending a snapshot collection roll-up. It's immediately when you use this data. So those are some block details there. Just wanted to show that. When we do the imports, we can also modify data. So you can go out, you can do a get that detail first, which pulls back the ID of the device, so that once we run an import with that ID in the JSON, it knows it's an update. And then any of the values that you specify in that modified become a modified address. And we'll cover some of those as well as we go through it. So then when we get down through the rest of this here, you're going to get into devices. These are your IP addresses. So looking for things like by host name, MAC address, importing address ranges, importing devices, and so on. There's various formats that we would use to go through this to provide that format. So we're going to cover some of these as we go through it. I'm going to cover it in Postman, and then I'll show you some curl, and we can show you, how that format looks there. And I think within this regard here, and at the time I have for this, I just want to kind of stop right here, and I'll come back in the next video, and I'm going to do two things. I'm going to pull up Postman as a REST API client. I'll show you how we can interact, some quick ways with the pre-request capabilities to go out and get that token first, then subsequently call any of the API commands and have it do that programmatically through your API REST. And I'll also show some simplified REST commands, and what I'm going to cover there specifically are some of the capabilities around the containers, and more specifically the add site functionality. And this is where we would go in and add your subnet templates. So when we create the site like a small branch, that we can go out and invoke that through an API to create the subnets after we create the container. So the sample script I'll show will go out, it'll log in, it'll then create a container for us by cloning a container that has all of the policies we need, and then I can either reparent it or use it in that same container hierarchy. And then it'll create the subnet template, which creates all the subnets. And we can further do things like invoke the deployment to the server and others. So I want to show that because it's a very simple bash script with some very simple input, and you can duplicate that and do it in just about any programming language, and we can take care of that. I'll help you with this along the way. So that's a good 20 minutes, good walkthrough of Swagger. Sorry I didn't get all the different APIs, but we'll go through some specifics in the next couple of videos. Now this is probably the third video I've done, so hopefully this will come through with audio and video. It won't start skipping around. And I will then see you in the next video if this one comes through. Take care, and see you next time.